Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. Let's talk about Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano in the DAZN undercards, Liam Smith, Jesse Vargas. We'll touch upon Galal EFI as well. On a separate video, I'm also going to talk about Shakur Stevenson and his masterclass against Oscar Valdez. We'll talk about his strengths and maybe a couple of weaknesses as well that we might have seen there last night. And we'll talk about how he would cope if he does go up a weight category, or indeed if he is going to become undisputed in this weight division. We'll talk about that in a separate video. In this particular video, let's talk about Katie Taylor first and foremost, and not just the fight. I also want to talk about what people are saying about women's boxing as a whole and this yearning to make women's boxing into 3-minute rounds. Something that I've discussed with Writing Yogi, for instance. Shout out to her. She feels that knockouts are the key and that you'd get more knockouts if you go for 3-minute rounds. I personally believe it would hurt women's boxing if they do that. We'll get to that later. First, let's talk about the fight. Katie Taylor looked very nervous coming down to the ring in what was an exceptional atmosphere. You had the Ricans out in force. You had the Irish out in force. The atmosphere was terrific. They're very, very loud. You saw in the center of the ring just before the fight begun, Amanda Serrano was mouthing to Katie Taylor, "This is crazy. It's just crazy." And Katie looked a little bit bemused. You know, she was sort of semi-smiling. Do I be nice about this? So am I supposed to be in the zone and be mean? You know, what do I do? She was a bit taken aback, I think. Maybe that was a bit of a mind game from Serrano, but they genuinely seemed like they were in awe of the atmosphere. And it was terrific. And it was a terrific advert for the women's game. It turned out to be an unbelievable fight. Now, the first 3 rounds, I had Katie Taylor 3-0 up. It was baffling to me that Mannix had Serrano 2-1 up. Because what you saw is Katie Taylor get on the back foot, start to circle around the ring. She was hitting her and then getting out and circling the ring, and Serrano's feet looked poor. She was unable to cut off the ring. It's like she didn't know how to cut off the ring. And she was getting clipped, and then Taylor was getting out, and she looked very sharp. And you're thinking, as long as Katie Taylor does this, she's going to win this fight wide on points, because Serrano has to do something to cut off the ring. So by the second round, when I realized that this was not going Serrano's way, I tweeted to say she needs to stop trying to cut off the ring, because she's got to stop chasing. She can't do this. Turn into Ugas, essentially. Go and take the center of the ring, but don't go after her. Let Katie circle, take the center of the ring, turn with her, and then when Katie decides to engage, when she's going to jump in to try and land, catch and counter. Catch her on her way out. So she's coming in, she's going to land, you've got the longer reach. As she's pulling out, you're going to have to be able to read her exit point, time her entry point, and read her exit point, and catch her on the way out. Well, by the third round, although Katie Taylor had won all 3 rounds, she started to change slightly in that third round. She started to exchange a little bit more with Serrano, and she landed a couple of big shots. And what it was like, what it was reminiscent to me of, was Sonny Edwards against Mitolani. He was getting on that back foot, touching him, hitting him, keeping away, making him fall short. But when they were exchanging on those sporadic occasions, Sonny Edwards was holding his own. He was doing very well in the exchanges. Same with Katie Taylor. But there's a difference between fighting your fight, and then when he forces you to fight his fight, you're able to stand there and exchange and live with him. And that's different to fighting exclusively the opponent's fight. So after the 4th round, when Katie Taylor decided in the 4th that she wanted to hold her feet a bit more, that was Serrano's first round. And to me, it was a very silly tactical move. And you heard Chris Mannix saying she's got to hold her feet more and throw, and McCaskill was saying it. No. What I did want her to do is go to Serrano's chest a little bit more, because if you're hitting the chest as you're exiting, it's going to stop a slip and then her to catch you as you're trying to pull out, right? You're keeping her off balance as you're pulling out. I wouldn't have minded a little bit more of that. But this idea that she needs to revert to plant her feet to throw big shots, I strongly disagreed with that tactical approach, and it cost her that 4th round. Then came the 5th, and in the 5th was one of the dumbest tactical decisions I have ever seen in a big fight. I have no idea why Katie Taylor, who was maintaining distance so well, making Serrano fall short in those first 3 rounds, decided that she was going to willingly back up onto the ropes, stay up against the ropes, and go to war with a bigger woman in Serrano, who started banging that body. And Taylor got battered. A lot of people are saying, oh, it should have been a 10-8 round. Listen, I've told you my opinions on this before. If you start introducing these ideas, it does 2 things. Number 1, it makes scoring even more subjective. You know, when is a round dominant enough to require it to be 10-8? And secondly, you are both punishing and rewarding the fighters for something that did not happen to them. There has to be a reward for getting battered but not hitting the floor. right? She could have taken a knee, and that knee would have given her a 10-second break to clear her head. She chose not to take a knee, and Serrano couldn't get her down. That very fact means you shouldn't punish her and give her a 10-8 round. You have to reward her for being a warrior enough to stay on her feet. By the same token, I cannot give Serrano the credit for not getting her down when you were incapable of getting her down. Your aim was to drop her. You couldn't drop her. So to me, it doesn't matter how much you battered someone. And yes, there are sporadic precedents for this. It shouldn't be scored like that, though. When Kovalev was fighting Hopkins, I think it was in round 12, I was screaming for the fight to get stopped. I was worried for Hopkins. His head was getting bounced all over the place. And some people were saying 10-8 round to Kovalev. No. Yeah, he could have stopped him. The ref should have stepped in my opinion. But you're not going to demand that Kovalev gets rewarded for not being able to get him down. So for me, no, not a 10-8 round. But the damage that was done, I thought to myself, this is very possible now that this dumb tactical move from Katie Taylor has cost her legs. She might not be able to recover from this point forth. This is Amanda Serrano's fight now. She could potentially win this fight, all because of that one stupid tactical move. But it didn't quite play out like that. If you go back and you mute the noise, you mute the commentary, which was ridiculously poor, and you also ignore the body language, don't look at the fact that Serrano looked confident and that Katie Taylor looked terrified, or Katie Taylor was on the back foot moving frenetically. This does not matter to me. Yes, you could argue that that's ring generalship, but ultimately it's punches landed that count. It's who's landing the shots, not who looks confident. It's not who looks like they might be struggling when they're not actually being hit with big shots. So if you look at that point forth, I don't actually feel that Katie Taylor lost a round until the last round. So in that 6th round, you will see that she was the one who was making Serrano basically walk into shots. Her legs were still gone. They weren't 100%. But here's the thing. If her legs are still a little bit wobbly, but she hasn't been wobbled, she's not getting hit and getting wobbled, she's just not as sturdy as she was in the previous round. Do I score that round against Katie Taylor for the damage that occurred in the round before? Or do I judge this as a standalone round? I have to judge it as a standalone round. If you did not see round 5, if your video screen switched off, it froze, and you came back at the start of round 6, so you missed round 5, and you see round 6, you're not scoring that round to Serrano. Do you see what I mean? You cannot carry the baggage of the previous round into this round. She bit down on that gum shield, and she was winning that round. But by this point, I felt like she was losing the war. I felt that Serrano was she was pacing herself, whereas Taylor was going forward at full out. She was getting 100 miles an hour, top gear. Serrano seemed to have more left in her. So at this point, I still felt that the momentum had swung in favour of Serrano. But while Serrano continued to look very solid and her shots were solid, she was still plodding forward. And she was getting caught with 1-2s consistently. Now, you heard Jessica McCaskill say, she's not going to the body. She's not throwing hooks. All Taylor's doing is landing 1-2s. All she's doing is landing 1-2s. If you're criticizing her tactics, then I understand. If you're going to say, listen, you've got to do more than 1-2s because Serrano's going to read that. And if she reads it, she's going to be able to slip the first one and then come back at you. That's a tactical approach. That's a tactical analysis. This is what you're saying she should do. Cool. I agree. I accept. Fair enough. Maybe. But don't tell me they're only 1-2s and as a result, Serrano's winning the round. I don't care if it's a 1-2. They're punches. She's getting caught with a jab right cross every single time. So what is it you want? These are scoring shots. She's walking into scoring shots consistently and she's landing sporadically. Now she's not hurting her to the extent whereby it's swinging the round in her favour. She was just walking into shots. And she was getting close and she was landing 1 or 2 shots and the commentary team were focusing on that. But that's not enough. Now, it was a very physically grueling fight for Katie Taylor, right? If you're talking about who was in more pain the next day, it's probably Katie Taylor. If you're talking about who had the bigger moments and really hurt the other person, it was Serrano that had the big moments. But this is not how boxing is scored. Over those 10 rounds, Amanda Serrano did not win most of them. I had her winning 3 rounds. Maybe I could give her 4. I can't give her more than that. And even the last round was a very tight swing round, which I did give to Serrano. But it was a great fight. All action stuff. But Katie Taylor won the fight. So I personally felt the commentary team was shocking. I know there's been, listen, I'm not holding it against those that felt Serrano won this fight. Okay, I'm not saying what you talking about. The first 3 rounds when Mannix had her 2-1 up, Serrano, I was thinking, what is he watching, right? But after that, I can understand some of those middle rounds if you gave to Serrano, because ultimately the question is this: Katie Taylor was outlanding her, but Serrano was landing some solid shots. Were those solid shots enough to swing it in favor of Serrano? Because she was not consistently hurting her. To me, it wasn't enough. You have to be affecting somebody, not because they've already been affected in the round before and she looks a bit shaky in general. Did your punch cause her to rock? Did you hurt her? If not, I'm not scoring that round to you. Additionally to that, when you hurt her, when you rocked her, was it enough of a rocking? This is where it becomes subjective, right? In other words, if I land 15 punches and you land 4, and you've hit me and my legs have stiffened a little bit, is that enough to give you the round? Whereas if you hit me and my legs go and I'm on the ropes, then yeah, maybe it's enough, right? You've won that round. But that's where it becomes subjective. I personally did not see a method in which Serrano wins this fight. That's my take on it. Let me know what you think. Which brings me on to the concept of 3-minute rounds. The reason I strongly disagree with this is because I believe it will lead to a less quality product. It will lower the tempo and the output of these women. Because here's the thing, right? If you add an extra minute onto a 10-round fight, you're talking about an extra 10 minutes. That equates to an extra 5 rounds compared to what they're fighting now. Now, if you were to make it from 10 rounds to 12 rounds, that's exactly reminiscent of the men's game. It's the equivalent of adding 6 extra rounds. That's compared to the tempo you're used to seeing now. Imagine adding 6 extra rounds according to the tempo that you see men fight at now. And it was an 18-round fight. The equivalent of being an 18-round fight. Think about how much men would slow down their tempos. The middle rounds are now no longer what they used to be. They're the championship rounds now, pretty much. That's the latter middle part of the fight. So you're starting to talk about women having to lower their tempo in order to be able to last that extra amount of time potentially, or they're going to continue to fight at the current tempo, maybe not be able to see it through to the equivalent without getting really tired. So the stoppages aren't going to increase knockouts in any quality format, because a lot of people are saying the more knockouts you get, the more excitement you're going to bring. It's not going to be more exciting if the tempo lowers, but women simply can't live with the current tempo, end up getting tired and getting stopped because they can't fight anymore. That's not going to increase the excitement. What makes this different to the men's game, which is very technical sometimes, is the full-on let's go to war type mentality. That's not to say that the women aren't technical too. Of course they are. But the reality is there are biological differences and women just aren't going to hit as hard as men. On average, men also have a lot more red blood cells. Between 37 and 42% of women's blood is comprised of red blood cells. With men, it's 42 to 47%. So you've got a discrepancy there, and red blood cells of course carry oxygen around the body and to the muscles, so it enables for more endurance and more explosive endurance. And we see this discrepancy in explosive athletic events and in endurance times and things like that in endurance events. Women also have higher levels of fat percentage, and we're not talking about being out of shape or anything like that. We're talking about people that are in shape, that are athletes. The physical construct of women is just different. You saw last night the new undisputed super middleweight champion, Franchon Cruz-Dezurn. You saw that. I mean, she's in great shape, but she's a bigger woman. You're not going to see a typical super middleweight man that looks like that. Canelo and Bivol aren't going to come in looking like that. That's not because she's not in good shape. She's just got a different body structure, and she's going to have to carry extra weight, which is also more tiring. Women actually have a skull that's thicker than men on average. Now it's unclear how this translates in terms of absorbing impact in, say, a car accident or being punched in the head or whatever it might be, because the shape of a woman's skull is different too. So as the impact occurs, how does it dissipate around the skull, the power? Is it more concentrated and perhaps causes more damage? We don't know that. But since we don't know, what we can focus on is just the element that does make sense that we do know, and that is that the thicker the skull, the more protection your brain gets from impact. So theoretically, women will also be able to absorb more punishment pound for pound compared to men. So if you can absorb more punishment to the head pound for pound, your opponent doesn't hit as hard pound for pound, the explosive endurance isn't the same pound for pound, well then what is the point of extending it in the hope of somehow translating that into more knockouts? No, that'd be boring. Focus on it being high tempo, frenetic and exciting. That's how I see it. That's my view on it. Because the video is dragged on, I'll talk about the undercard on the following video with Shakur Stevenson, which I'm also going to upload tonight. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to hit that like button with a jab, the notifications button with a right cross, and the subscribe button with a left uppercut. It really does help the channel grow. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. God bless.